If there's one question that people ask all the time when preparing for the UCAT, it's probably going to be something along the lines of, what UCAT service should I use when I'm preparing? And that's a really valid question, so let's have a look at that. Hey guys, what's going on? It's Yang. I'm a first year medical student at Monash University in Victoria, Australia, and on my channel we talk about all things related to study, but more specifically VC, UCAT, and things about technology and other stuff that can help improve your life. So today we're going to be having a look at a topic that is, again, as I said before, really mentioned and talked about, and that is, what UCAT service should you be using if you're sitting the test this year or if you're sitting the test next year. Now, given that the test is an online test, there is always a plethora of services available, and sometimes it might be hard to distinguish what's good and what's worth your money. So let's have a look at that today. Now, before I jump into the actual comparison between the different services, I do want to mention that anything I do say in this video is really what I think and my personal experience. You also have to note that some things have changed from when I last used them, which was last year. So anything that I do say is really expressing my own thoughts and opinions and not what you might feel about these services. Having said that, let's jump into it. So I think when we compare UCAT services, there's three main factors that we have to compare there. First thing being quality. Obviously you want your questions to be good and accurate. Okay, second thing being the pricing, because again, we're all high school students, right? It's very hard to find something that we can afford with a part-time job, so comparing that as well. And then the last thing there is obviously the structure, because again, structure is really important in terms of how many questions there are, how is the LMS, and things along those lines. So I'm going to be talking about each three of those factors and then making an overall comparison between the services. So the very first factor I'm going to talk about is quality, and I think this one's quite obvious. Clearly you want the service that you're paying for to have the highest quality. Now, in terms of the UCAT, this is referring to both the accuracy of the questions, the actual test itself, the style of the questions, the layout of the LMS, which stands for the Learning Management System, among other factors like how quickly the system loads and how often it crashes, or whether it crashes or not. Because again, when you're preparing, I can tell you the absolute worst thing to have is when you're working late at night at 11 and suddenly the whole system goes offline and you're stuck without questions. Definitely a bit of a first world problem there. But you can clearly see on this list, I've got most of the major services ranked from Tier A to Tier D, Tier A obviously being your best, and then Tier D not necessarily being your worst, but just being less good compared to the others. Let's have a look at what's going on here. So obviously in Tier A you have Medify and MedEntry. To me, both Medify and MedEntry are the gold standards of quality within UCAT question banks. They are accurate, they're varied, they're quick, sometimes faster than the actual test, and are mostly consistent. Now, the reason why I say mostly is because you will have certain sections within certain services within Medify and MedEntry that aren't as easy or aren't as hard as the actual test. A clear example of that is the VR mini mocks within Medify, which are notorious for being a little bit on the easier side. Now, why I say mostly consistent is it balances out. So for example, if it does have an easier VR section, it might have a hard QR section, and overall you've really got nothing big to worry about there, because even the differences there are minimal, and Medify and MedEntry have noticed that and have made changes to obviously fix that and keep it consistent. Now, in terms of comparing Medify and MedEntry against each other, I think you have nothing to worry about in terms of quality, as they're both really good, and the differences in quality are going to be so minute that it's barely going to have an impact on how you actually go. Now, I'm going to go a little controversial on Tier B. So within Tier B, I've placed ICanMed and the official UCAT question bank. ICanMed's actual questions, though limited, are generally pretty good, and the difficulty I would say is on par with the actual exam. Their shortfall, however, and this is from my experience, is oftentimes their LMS is down, and while that is not a huge issue if you prepare during the normal times of the day, so you know, in the afternoon or in the morning, sometimes if you're doing it late at night like I was, it can be very frustrating because it takes them a few hours to get it back and up and going, and sometimes you have to message this person and message another person, and it's very difficult to work around. Another thing to keep in mind as well is that the ICanMed LMS is not as well optimized for MacBooks. So what that meant was, if I was using my MacBook here to do my UCAT preparation, oftentimes when I would open the calculator, it would open up a new window, which again is a bit of a first world problem, but it's annoying when you only have one screen and you obviously want the question question, but then you have to open up a calculator and use it on the other page. So again, just another thing to keep in mind, and it's little things like that which places the ICanMed in tier B. Now, here comes the controversial one. I have decided to place the official UCAT question bank in tier B. How can that be, you may ask? You know, aren't they the same people that literally write the exams? Yes, but hear me out. So when the UCAT question bank questions are good, they're perfect. There's nothing wrong with them. However, they have the most variety out of the four I've just mentioned in terms of easy and hard. And what you'll notice by doing some of the VR or some of the QR is that the VR is very good. However, the DM is very, very easy, and the QR and the mocks is very, very hard. So this is to the point where the differences aren't even minimal. It's to the point where if you were just using the UCAT official question bank, you would have a warped vision of how the QR is going to be really, really difficult and how the DM is going to be really, really easy. Which is a bit of an issue, obviously, when you actually sit the exam. Because obviously you don't want that to be your first shock of saying, okay, why is the decision making so much harder, or why is the QR so much easier? Now, obviously, that is one minor downfall. Overall, the questions are very, very accurate to the style that provide, and the LMS is quite good. Alongside this, a lot of the shortcuts that work in the actual exam, for example, selecting A, B, C, or D on the keyboard to pick your answer on the actual exam, don't work on the official question bank. And this is amplified if you use a MacBook. Again, really heavy Apple attack here, but for some reason on the official question bank you can't use a lot of the shortcuts of the MacBook, which again can be really frustrating when you're preparing because you don't want to go into the exam and use the shortcuts for the very first time. So again, something else to keep in mind. Having said that, these two resources are still excellent resources to invest in if you have the money and the dedication to work through them, which is something I'm going to be talking about later as well. For Tier C, I think my experiences is going to be a little limited, as I'm mainly judging from their free questions rather than their paid question banks. Again, a common theme through question banks is a lack of consistency, and I can totally understand that. When you're writing thousands of questions, and particularly when I hear sometimes it's the university students that do it, it's very hard to be consistent and ensure that every single one of your questions is up to standard. But I think this is particularly amplified within the MedicMind, Medic Portal, and Kaplan Paperbook questions. So some questions were far too easy, others were far too hard, and on top of this, I found a lot of wrong answers in some of the services. And on top of that, sometimes they had glitchy learning management systems as well. So definitely a couple of red flags there. But again, I do want to reiterate, these aren't necessarily bad resources, they're just less good. So going into TD, alright, these are our less good resources than the aforementioned ones. So the first one I want to talk about is Past Medicine. Now, Past Medicine is a little bit of a mess. Their VR stuff is generally fine, but their questions are all over the place. So for example, you're going to get quantitative reasoning, you're going to get verbal reasoning questions within their decision-making mocks for some reason. And on top of that, they use a really funny text font for some of their questions, which just messes with my mind for some reason. Really small thing, again, first of all, problem, and a lot to complain about, especially given they're free, but again, things to keep in mind. Now, I also used Fraser's UCAT free question bank before that was removed, and from my experience, it was very questionable. The questions oftentimes weren't very clear and they were a bit too hard. On top of that, the way of presenting questions to you was very whack. So for example, sometimes if I was to do a mock or do a set of questions, I would get the same question 6 or 7 times. Now, having said that, I do think they've revamped things a little, so this could be completely different than what I'm speaking about, but it's just things to keep in mind if you're going to use them. Finally, just a bit of an honorable mention, I haven't mentioned private tutoring services because I'm not here to definitively say what is the best, who is better than who, especially given that I haven't used all of them, in fact, any of them. So generally my thoughts, especially as a tutor myself, is private groups and tutors can be a little more structured, which is helpful if you're disorganized, and it helps have someone keeping you accountable and keep you on track. So if you're the type of person that likes to treat the UCAT just like another school subject, it might be worthwhile getting a tutor or joining a tutoring group, as you'll be a little less lost than you would be without that. Okay, so let's have a look at the price. A big thing. Everyone here most likely is going to be either a broke high school student or a broke uni student, because if that wasn't you, you've probably got them all. So, as you can see here on my list, again, I've ranked everything this time from A to C, comparing them in terms of their price point. Now, I am going to speak about their price to quality ratio as well, because I think it's important to consider that even if a resource is completely free, if their questions are horrible, it's probably not going to be worth it. But this list you can see here is almost purely based off the price point. So obviously your A tier resources are going to be your official question bank and past medicine. And I think even within that, your official question bank questions are going to be a lot better. Number one, because they're free. But number two, because most of the time they're very, very good. Now, past medicine, just to speak about it a little, again, it's not as good as your other resources, but again, they're completely free, so you've almost got nothing to complain about there. So I think in terms of price point, our A tier is definitely the official question bank and past medicine, just because they're completely free. Now, in my B tier, I've got Fraser's UCAT, Medify, Kaplan, and MedicMind. So going to them one by one, Fraser's UCAT is $240, I believe. And that is, again, pretty good value for the amount of questions you're getting, and on top of that you get the lessons as well. So one thing is, question banks versus lessons are very different. For example, Medify provides the question bank, however doesn't provide the lessons. You know, ICanMed provides both the lessons and the question bank, and you know, places like MedEntry, you have the option of selecting one or either. So that is relevant because UCAT's $240 course provides lessons. So that can be useful. Now, I haven't actually sat those lessons myself, so I'm not going to comment on the efficiency of those lessons. However, it is something to consider if you're looking for a cheap option that contains both. Medify, definitely lots of value for what they are. $320 for a 12-month subscription, and if you're using it for less than that, I think you can get the 4-month subscription for just under $300. So really, really good value there, because I can promise you, you're probably not going to be able to get through the whole question bank. So if you get the Medify question bank, you're going to be set from point A to point B, from 0 to 100. MedicMind and Kaplan are definitely your cheaper options. Kaplan, especially with that price point of $30, can't really miss it all there, because worst case scenario, you buy the book, you realize it's horrible, and you've lost $30, which hopefully isn't too big of a deal there. MedicMind, $139, can be a little bit cheaper if that is a major concern, but in terms of value, you can't really go past Medify, especially due to that price to quality ratio. Now, ICanMed and MedEntry are great resources, and that's what I'm going to talk about later in the video. However, they are a little bit pricier, up towards that $700 to $795 range. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, both of those do offer group discounts, so if you're able to get a group of friends together and potentially organize a group thing there, I think you do get a couple $100 off, which can be really helpful. But without those discounts, they're around about the $700 to $800 mark. And I'm not going to speak about the Medic portal here because it is a UK-based service, and I think they're generally around $600. So again, things to keep in mind. Now, our third and final factor to talk about here is structure. And what I mean by structure is not only how many questions do they have, but it's how accurate is their LMS? What statistics do they provide? Overall, is it good to use? Is it enjoyable to use? Is it a smooth experience? Medify and MedEntry are again very solid with what they provide, providing over 20,000 questions and 20 plus exams. And what I particularly like about Medify and MedEntry is they provide in-depth statistics. MedEntry more so than Medify, but both of them will provide charts of how you compare based on the cohort, how you compare based on yourself, and also give you ranges and give you percentiles. So even if you get a lower score, maybe it was the fact that it was a harder test, and so having that percentile there is really useful in comparing to others and not just comparing to yourself. In terms of volume, definitely can't go past MedEntry and Medify. In fact, one of them will be more than enough. I think over my journey of preparing for the UCAT over a couple of months, I maybe did around 11,000 questions, which sounds like a lot. That is barely over halfway of the Medify question bank. So they're continuously adding questions, so I don't think you'll run into the issue of running out of questions with either of those services. Now, ICanMed provides a little less with around 2,500 questions. However, the LMS works quite well, and they're very meticulous in terms of their structure, meaning you won't ever feel lost. And that is the big thing about ICanMed. They're going to take you from 0 to 100, and they're going to tell you every step of the way. They're going to help you from the very start to the very end. The official question bank is obviously also quite a good choice with over 2,500 questions. This is a bit more, again, of a self-guided one, but if you're the type of person that's really organized and want to experience your own way of finding the UCAT, I think the official question bank is definitely the way to go. Thirdly, phrases UCAT, Medic Portal, MedicMind, Past Medicine all provide enough volume, but again, volume of questions doesn't matter as much when the quality is a slight bit lower, which is what I've generally found with those three, or those four rather. And finally, Kaplan provides around 1,500 questions, and on top of that, they're paper books. So for a computer test, can you sort of see where the issue is with that? So looking at things overall, you can see here, I've got a list of everything ranked from tier A to tier D. And again, I do want to repeat again that I don't necessarily think the tier D resources are bad. I just think they're less good compared to the tier A resources. And I think this is to be expected as well. So you can see here, in my list, in tier A, I've got Medify and MedEntry. And I think obviously you can't look past Medify and MedEntry. If you're tossing up between one or the other, you have to realize that at this point, it won't matter which service you select because both will provide that high quality questions that will help maximize your study. And for this reason, I generally recommend these services as your #1 priority if financially possible. Now, you can never be guaranteed a good score, but if you get one of these services and you put in a really, really good effort, I'm just going to say you should be surprised if you don't get at least a decent score. On top of that, I don't even think it's a question of should I get both or should I get one of them? I think just pick one of them. It doesn't even matter. You could throw a dart at a dartboard and have that help you select, and I don't think it'll impact your score too much. ICanMed is an excellent resource if you have the time. The strategies are very well implemented and taught, however they require a lot of dedication and organization to pertain to. So again, if you're someone that likes to treat the UCAT just like another VCE subject, ICanMed is probably your best bet there. They teach you the best way of solving questions with minimal amount of actual question practice. Just be aware that if you do choose to go with ICanMed, you have to be prepared to spend a lot of time preparing. So if you're starting your preparation now, I would just be a little bit cautious for getting ICanMed because I don't think you'll have enough time to finish the course in whole, which again will probably impact how you go overall. However, if you're sitting the test in 2023, definitely give that a think. The official question bank, again, as I mentioned before, is also brilliant. And again, maybe all you need if you do it well. I think the official question bank paired with YouTube, paired with the UCAT Discord, quick shout out there, really, really good, is truly unparalleled, and given its price point, $0, is a very attractive option for those that are not wanting to spend much on their preparation. Now, I find that MedicMind in the C tier does a good job breaking down their questions into their question type, and the vast range of questions means you generally won't be worrying about running out. However, I would only think of looking at MedicMind if you're really running out of options and running out of questions within your first 2 tiers, which really, if you're doing things right, shouldn't be an issue. Now, Past Medicine is also a great option since they're free, but I don't think they should be utilized as a primary study resource. Instead, Past Medicine is great if you're thinking about applying for the UCAT and you don't know yet and you just want to try some of the questions. Definitely a great option. Now, generally this bottom tier, I would try and avoid them just because there's so many better options out there, but mainly because Medic Portal is a UK-based resource, Kaplan is a paper book for an online test, and Fraser's UCAT is just a little too unproven for me to personally use. To wrap things up, I think the best thing to do is obviously keep in mind the things I've said, but also try out some of the questions yourself. Most services will have a free mock exam or a free sample question for you to have a go at, so if you want to really decide what's best for you based on your situation, I would always check out each one of these websites and just try a couple of questions and see how they feel. Does the LMS work? How do you feel like the questions are? And obviously get some other opinions as well, because everything I have said is purely what I think. So to wrap things up, that's it. That's my thought on the major UCAT providers for 2022. So I hope you've picked up something from this video, and I think There's a lot more valuable resources and guides in my blog that I've posted on this same topic, so be sure to check that out if you can. But yeah, that's really all I have to say. I'm hoping I can be a little more consistent with the posting. Sorry about that, guys. I have been in university for the past 6 weeks, so it's been pretty hard to balance YouTube on top of that, but I'm looking to get a bit more consistent with that. And yeah, so if you, as always, if you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave that down below. But if not, I hope you learned something today, and if so, make sure to like and subscribe. But if not, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.